Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming a distinguished leader whose commitment to progress and innovation has left an indelible mark on our nation. Khairy Jamaluddin played a pivotal role in Malaysia's response to the COVID-19 pandemic, spearheading efforts to vaccinate the Malaysian population through mega vaccination centers nationwide, mobile units in remote areas, and combating misinformation. Looking around the room, there are people from many different countries today, and we know how difficult it was to tackle this unpredictable beast. I could think of no one better to lead us through some of the darkest times of our nation. Beyond his impactful tenure in government, Khairy Jamaluddin has transitioned into the realm of media. Welcome. First as a radio DJ, and now as the esteemed host of Southeast Asia's #1 current affairs podcast, Keluar Sekejap. His dedication to informing and engaging the public continues to inspire all of us, many of us. Please join me, ladies and gentlemen, in welcoming the remarkable Khairy Jamaluddin.
Hi, Assalamualaikum. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Keith, for a very kind introduction. Happy to be here, speak at the Sustainability Conference, Technology and AI in Service of Sustainability and Regeneration. Wow, what a mouthful. I'm going to speak to you today based on some of my experiences while I was in government and some insights that I've gleaned as a broadcaster. So just looking around the room, I sense that this is not just a Malaysian audience, but there are people from overseas as well. So just by way of introduction, quick introduction, my name is Khairy Jamaluddin. Some Malaysians know me. I used to be a politician. I was a politician for almost more than 2 decades. I was a member of parliament for 3 terms. I served as Minister of Youth and Sports, Minister of Science, Technology and Innovation, Minister of Health during COVID. I lost at the last general election, and then I was expelled from my political party. I found myself with nothing to do in life, and I became a podcaster. That is the route for most failed politicians now. So in that diverse experience that I've had, I tried to think about how to dovetail my experience with what you are talking about today, building sustainable brands, how brands stay on point, on message in this marketplace where sustainability has become an important issue, not just something that you put there as for marketing purposes, but I'll explain later why I think it's much more fundamental than that, especially for young people. So I've been given the task of speaking about young people, technology, and sustainability, empowering youth in shaping a sustainable future with my experience in politics, in government, and now in media. So the first thing we have to try and understand, of course, is the target market. And this is really, really important because what is young? Who is young? Who's youth? When I was Minister of Youth and Sports, we had a long-running debate. I mean, some people who are from other countries may find this puzzling, but different countries have different definition of youth. So when I was Minister of Youth and Sports, I was appointed in 2013. I left office in 2018. We had youth leaders who were in their 40s. And we started by bringing about an amendment, which was continued by my successor, to try to bring that age limit down to 30 years old. So when you talk about youth segments in cultivating a brand and building your brands, obviously you're talking about people in between the 15 years old, 25 years old, zillennials. But it's important to understand what youth is, because it's not just about the consumers, it's about people making decisions, policymakers for the youth segment. So here you have on the right, you have somebody who's 17 years old. This is Malaysia's top Muay Thai prospect, Jojo Ghazali, is 17 years old. Then you have Uncle Roger on the left. Some of you may know Uncle Roger. He's actually Malaysian. He's about 37, I think. And then in the middle, you have the youth leader of one of our biggest political parties in Malaysia. He's about 38. I was also youth leader of that same political party before I got expelled. And I was youth leader until I was 42 years old. And I told my political masters at that time, I said, I had no business being youth leader at 42 years old. I had already had, I don't know, 3 kids by then. And I was supposed to lead, shape policies for people in their 20s. This is just crazy. So I think we have to be very, very certain about how we define youth, and we have to make sure that people who are in the position of making policy, guiding brands, building brands around the market for young people need to be of that generation, or certainly be of a generation that understands that particular segment. So I wanted to focus on really, for me, in the broadcasting, podcasting, media world, when we look at our numbers, so for instance, we look at our data analytics almost all the time to see where the strongest growth of our viewership is. I have a problem. I have a problem because I'm not penetrating below 25 years old. You know, my podcast speaks about serious stuff, speaks about politics, but what I really want to tap into is people under 25 years old, because I think that that's the biggest market as far as future for politics is concerned. Those are people who are first-time voters. If I have any hope of coming back to politics, I want to have traction within that group of people, talking about 15 to 25, and that's the market in which we do. The growth is not strongest in that particular segment. We do very well 25 to 40 years old, people who want to listen to a podcast about politics, but we're not doing enough here. So we spend a lot of time trying to understand the Zillennial group, which is 12 to 25, try to understand whether they are willing to listen to long format podcasts, trying to understand if they don't want to listen to long format podcasts, how is it that we diffuse our message through other social media platforms so that they can understand it, so they consume it, and we try to understand who they are. So in the Olympics recently, the enduring image for young people, the Zillennials, was this image. It wasn't so much the standout performance of Mayen Lopez, the Cuban wrestler who won his 5th gold medal in wrestling. It wasn't so much the exploits on the athletics field or track or the swimming pool, but rather it was of this Turkish guy who won a silver medal with nonchalant appearance, and he became a meme. And this was spread because simply for young people, Zillennials, they want authenticity, relatability, social consciousness. He went there without specialized equipment. He went there like a grandfather, put his hand in his pocket, just wearing glasses, nothing specialized about him, and won a silver medal. And that was the enduring image of the Olympics. Think about that. Think about why this was the image for young people, because it was a meme. It was something that characterized what resonated with them at the Olympics. Nothing fake about him, absolutely everything 100% real, and effortless, really effortless, and he won a silver medal. So this is really important for us to understand that for a lot of brands right now, moving towards ESG, it's still ticking a box. And for a lot of people also, the intention, I had a conversation just before I came in here, the intention is there, but the action is falls short of the intention. But for these young people, Zillennials, as I call it, or as some people call it, sustainability is not just ticking that ESG box. So when you advise brands about how to commit themselves to becoming a sustainable brand, you have to understand that it's not ticking a box, it's not just fulfilling ESG reporting, but for this crucial group of consumers that we want to capture, I want to capture for my podcast, you want to capture for your brands, it's actually existential. Because for them, this is more real than it is for us or for older generation. For us, the time horizon is different. It's a crisis of the horizon because we see it, but we may not be around for it. But for them, they've internalized the fact that it's theirs, They will own it, they will inherit it, and they'll bear the brunt of the effects of whatever it is that's about to come, whether it's climate change, whether it's changes in demographic patterns, whether it's the health crisis, impending health crisis, whether it's the next pandemic. It's actually existential for them. So this is the first generation in which the sustainability that you and I talk about ESG compliance, is actually not about compliance. It's actually about their lives. It's actually about what they think they will have to deal with in the future. And for them, generations that precede them are actually seen to be quite selfish. This is the generation, well, my generation, I was born in 1976, that led the world to become the way it is today. And here we are preaching about trying to check ESG boxes, when for them, actually, it's much, much more than that. It's their lives. So that leads to them, of course, wanting to align their values with everything that they do in life, whether it's what they consume, whether it's where they work, what they learn. Everything has to be of things that resonate with similar values to them. So they pick things which not just, and they do their research. The younger generation, they don't just take your word for it, and I'll get into that later. They do their research. They want to make sure that their values are aligned, and things that they do and things that they associate themselves with at every single point in their lives align with their values, whether it is about climate change, whether it's about sustainability, whether it's about social justice, whether it's about equality, equity. These are things that they feel very strongly about, and they actually wear this on their sleeve in everything that they do in their lives. And they are equipping themselves with making a difference in the world. So my niece is about to leave to the UK next month. She got a place in the UK to do university. I asked her, what are you going to study? She said sustainability. The number of universities, not just in the UK, but across the world, that are introducing sustainability degrees are increasing rapidly. There's a demand for it because young people, they don't just want to live it, they want to understand it, they want to be subject matter experts on sustainability. And interestingly, they go further into demanding that universities change their courses. So some universities have repurposed their old environment courses into sustainability degrees, but young people are quick on it, and they said that's not good enough. We want to make sure that there's an element not just of science, as was traditionally the case for a lot of environment degrees, but it had to also focus on social issues, social justice, economic issues, and issues surrounding climate change and the effect on demographics. So young people are not just being hoodwinked into repackaged degrees at universities from what used to be called environment science in my days to sustainability degrees, but they're actually demanding that those degrees themselves in their curriculum are changing. So again, we are going to be confronted by people who not just believe very strongly in the existential crisis that they face, but they know a lot more than actually we do, and they know a lot more than we assume. And they are acting on their values. This is not an inactive generation. This is not a generation that just talks. This is not a generation that just writes on social media. This is not just a generation that conceives or just thinks or ideates things. They actually go out and do stuff about it. So there's been a survey saying that 70% of Gen Z actually are actively engaged in social or political causes. And this active in social political causes spans everything from being right there as people on the front lines to advocating online as well. And you know, they don't distinguish this. The digital natives, they know what they can do in real life. They know what they can do online. And they go out and do it. This is a generation that isn't waiting for change. They are demanding it, and we're seeing it right now, especially with the genocide in Gaza, how a lot of the resistance, a lot of the protests are coming from young people on campuses across the world, especially in the United States, where I think there's been a lot of resistance and protests against the foreign policy of the United States in the Middle East. And this is something that I'm quite familiar with, which is they digital natives, young people digital natives, they are exposed to diverse perspectives. And I think this is important for people working in media, in brand strategy, that they are able to circumvent traditional media gatekeepers because they know how to get information that they want. So if your strategy is to use not just traditional media, but traditional media strategy, yeah, where we gatekeep, where we try to tell people what they want to know, or try to tell people, young people, what we think they want to know. This is the information that we think is important or germane to you. That's not going to work because they're going to find out, they're going to get around it. It's impossible to gatekeep information with young people today. And it's easy for them to expose people who are not authentic. That's why people get canceled now, because you cannot gatekeep information anymore. In the past, it was easier to gatekeep information. I'm a politician, I know. There are things that we want people to know. There are things that we don't want people to know. We use traditional media strategy to amplify and highlight things, the successes, our achievements. We try to make sure that our failures and weaknesses are hidden away somewhere, but we can't gatekeep information anymore because this generation, even if you bury it, 1,000 foot deep in the internet will always remember. So, and I'm very mindful of this because I say a lot of things on my podcast right now, and I call a lot of things out on my podcast, and I'm just horrified that one day will come when I go back into politics, people will come and dig through the archives and play and there'll be a highlight reel of me saying all sorts of things. So media gatekeepers, it can't work. So you have to, and I'll come to the point later, you have to make sure that you're consistent across all platforms because you'll get found out if you're not. So how do we harness this wave? I mean, it's scary, it's powerful because they are active, they believe strongly. I mean, it's almost this zealousness coming from this young generation about demanding sustainability. How do you harness it? Because if you don't harness it, it's going to be difficult because we build brands, and we want to make sure that our brand rides this wave, right? We don't want our brands to be canceled. We don't want our brands to be a meme for the wrong reasons. We want it to be a meme for the right reason. And most importantly, we want to do things for the right reasons. I think that's the point of sustainability. It's not just ticking a box. You want to make sure that your organizations, the organizations that you advise, are actually doing something, doing good for the public good. So for instance, in my podcast, I always remind the team that it's not just about eyeballs, it's not just about views, it's about educating ourselves and the public. So we have to anchor our podcast into something of a higher purpose, a common purpose, public purpose, rather than just put on a public political podcast once a week or twice a week and criticize everyone else. It has to be something a bit more than that. We have to aspire to something higher because that's really where this wave of change is coming from. So the first is, I think, education and resources. We have to respect this change. We have to educate ourselves. We have to educate them because, again, no traditional media gatekeeping anymore. So what that does is it does open the vulnerability to fake news, to things that are not curated. Young people, they don't want curated content anymore, so they'll take it from wherever they can get it. The downside to that, and there is a downside to this, is that stuff that's not real can spread, and that's a real threat to a lot of people, for brands as well. Brands have been destroyed by news that's just not real, that's just not true. So education is important. I cannot stress enough the fact that you need to put out education, you need to put out as much resources as possible so that it's out there. You can't tell them to read it because that's gatekeeping, but you can put it out there for them to find. You can put it out there and nudge them towards these resources that are crucial to looking after your brand. So for instance, I'm speaking abstract. I don't like that specifics. So recently, I had this experience where I endorsed a particular product. That particular product, one of the shareholders many years ago was associated with an investment company that was associated with companies that are associated with companies who are selling arms to a country who killing people in the Middle East. and it wasn't true anymore. It was outdated information, but it was used against me because I'm a quasi-political figure. So it's important at that point in time to look after the brand, and then that brand in that particular case was me and that company that I endorsed. And it wasn't a case of that's not true, rubbish. This is what's true. But we had to get the information out there in a way which young people who are online would find it on their own and say, actually, yeah, we were wrong about this. So it's a completely different way of looking after brands, crisis management, brand strategy, communication, something that I think we're all trying to figure out and get a sense of. Secondly, utilize technology and innovation. Of course, this is obvious motherhood statement, but young people, obviously digital natives, that is their playground. They advocate, they communicate, they educate through technology. So, it's not native to us, our generation. I'm looking at people perhaps in Gen Y, Gen Z, Gen X. But that really is the playground for the younger generation. Third, advocate for policy change. And I think, this comes to where brands live and also project themselves beyond the business and are involved actually in shaping the environment in which that brand exists. So if you're advising an aviation company, for instance, then that aviation company is involved in pushing for policy change for sustainable fuels, for instance. That's how that brand is enhanced. People want to be associated with companies, with brands that they consume, that they also know care enough to want to change that industry and disrupt that industry for the better. So I think it's important for brands to also not just look at obviously the business, but be involved in that particular sector in advocating for policy change with the government and with the regulators. Empower youth-led initiatives, encourage social responsibility, leverage social media, embrace diversity, inclusion. I think these are things and themes that many of you have discussed. I don't have to elaborate further on some of these things. I wanted to share with you some things that I did at the Science and Technology Ministry. Sorry, the slide's a bit busy, but I'll try and articulate it so you don't have to try to read it. In how we, so I was there for about slightly over a year. This was during the pandemic in 2020, 2021, before I went to the Health Ministry. I was at the Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation. And I wanted to share with you 4 things that we did that touched on technology, sustainability, and young people. So the first thing that we did was, and you have to remember that 2020 was when COVID started. So there was this huge lockdown around the world. Malaysia was not excluded and spared. We had lockdown in 2020. We had what was called the movement control order. You couldn't go out unless it was for an emergency. Only one person could go out to get groceries, things like that. I mean, it seemed like a lifetime ago, but this was very real. So there was a certain sense of global purpose during COVID, I thought, especially amongst younger people. They felt that, we were all in this together. It was that one of the first times, I think, in many, many years, in decades, in fact, where a lot of people thought about the common purpose of humanity because we were in the same situation. And I thought to myself, this is the best time to try to harness technology in young people to try to solve the big questions of today. Because COVID was a big question of that day, pandemic that affected everyone. So I thought this was the time to inspire young people in thinking about big questions and for the Ministry of Science and Innovation to support them and say, we have your back. So one thing that I did was I reorganized the ministry. There was an old agency that was looking after technology incubation center ecosystem here in Malaysia, which was quite dated. That agency had gone from becoming a technology commercialization accelerator to really just the facilities management. It used to be called Technology Park Malaysia. Some Malaysians will still remember this place. It was quite a tragic place just outside of Kuala Lumpur. I merged that with a smaller but very exciting government agency that focused on accelerator programs called Magic. We turned it into Meranti, and we turned it into a sandbox for emerging technology and ideas that we wanted to disrupt and solve public problems. So we created the sandbox, and it was great because during COVID, not many people were moving around, so the sandbox was quite lively. We were able to do things like test drone deliveries of medicine, drone deliveries of food, and that sounds easy to do. It is easy to do. It is easy to do in terms of technology, but it involves regulators. It involves flight paths. It involves your civil aviation authority. We were able to do that. And so again, creating that sandbox where people came to solve ideas, big ideas, committed towards sustainability. Secondly, we have in Malaysia a grant giving agency called Cradle. So Cradle gives a lot of money to startup companies. When I went to the ministry, the Cradle's under the science ministry, I asked them, who are the biggest recipients of technology grants under Cradle? So a lot of startups get money from Cradle. So the biggest group of startups that get money from this government agency are e-commerce platforms. So, you set up a platform, you want to sell something, you create a platform, we will fund you. So I thought to myself, that's great, because that's expanding e-commerce, people are buying things online, accessibility for small, medium businesses, accessibility for local brands, fantastic. I said, but that's not good enough, because we also need to channel a bit of money into deep tech, into solving bigger problems. So we did that. We came up with Accelerate program for SMEs and early stage startups, where I said it's not just about giving money to the next, Lazada, Shopee, Shein, Temu, or whatever it is, but sectors like advanced manufacturing, food security, sustainability, people who are looking at deeper technology that can solve the bigger problems of our time. And that excited a lot of people. It didn't excite Cradle too much because it's a difficult investment to make, a difficult grant to give, because they don't know how to give grants like that because the risk profile is higher. But I said to them, it's not the majority of our portfolio, but it's important for us as a statement of intent to say, hey, we are a country that believes in deeper technology, longer gestation period to solve bigger problems. Because if you don't do that, then there's no progress. The third is I came up with the Ministry of Education something called the Tech Olympics. So very simple. It's a science competition amongst school students. It's still there today, but a science competition that's slightly different. So we got industry to come and sponsor different things. So we had drone racing, we had coding, we had robotics competition. Again, with the purpose of, the overarching purpose when I introduced this, of familiarizing young people with usable, practicable technology that's already in the market that can solve bigger problems. So my pitch to students was, why are you doing robotics? So the robotics competition amongst primary school students essentially could be two robots fighting each other, which one pushes the other one off the table. But you would elevate that so that young people would understand why Uncle Khairy, Uncle KJ has come to ask them to do this, because we want to make sure that there is an uplift in manufacturing, less of a dependency on migrant labor, to make sure that we can automate our factories, and to make sure that we can deploy people into other areas of the economy. So from early on, trying to expose them to why that technology has a higher purpose, or has use for a higher purpose. And the last thing I did was, the Science Ministry gives out millions of grants every year, and nobody knows where those grants go to. I mean, it goes to very obscure places. Nobody follows up on it. We don't know if it's been commercialized. We don't know if it's succeeded or not. So I changed the entire grant structure from obscure, very, very, early stage applied research that's been done in some university somewhere where no one has sight about where those grants are going and what's happening to them. And I created what was called the Malaysian Grand Challenge. And I presented, I think, 6 or 7 big grand challenges to our young researchers at the university. So I said, for instance, the great challenges were, 5 funding schemes, reduce Malaysia's dependence on foreign technology, address health, in terms of solutions for non-communicable disease. We have some of the highest levels of NCDs here in Malaysia: diabetes, cardiovascular disease, hypertension. How do we have sustainable environment? Food security. So I presented the country with 6 or 7 different grand challenges to solve and align the grant-giving processes to these big challenges. And you try to make sense of these bigger issues for young people working on these things so that there is purpose, they're purpose-driven, and their research is purpose-driven as well. So my last slide is lessons from podcasting. I've gone through policy, I've gone through how we change the funding ecosystem in Malaysia to make sure it's more aligned with higher purpose, with public purpose. But this is more about the branding side of things, communicating side of things, communication side of things, what I've learned from podcasting. So one, of course, and this is an obvious point, but try to understand your audience. I think data, there's not enough data that you can go through, but more importantly, I think, we're inundated with data on a daily basis. I'm inundated with data on a daily basis. This is how many people listening to you, they're listening to you from here, this is how old they are, this is what their gender is. But really, it's making sense of that data. Somebody telling me all these things about data doesn't mean anything. It's just, no. But I want to know what I want to do with that data. How do I change how I sit? How do I change the topics that we touch about? How many minutes should we limit the podcast to? So trying to make actionable goals from the data you get, I think that's really where you have to invest in people who can do that. Not many people can do that, but that's really the secret sauce. Align with core values. So I said, we're not just a podcast. I don't go out there saying, Keluar Sekejap is a political podcast. I go out there with humility saying that I don't know everything. We're trying to learn. Sharil, my partner, and I on the podcast, we try to learn, and at the same time, we try to educate everyone else about issues of the day. So the biggest challenge that we have, and the refrain that we want to get out there all the time, because we talk about stuff, political stuff. Some of it is easy to understand, and some of it is quite technical. So we talk about taxes, we talk about fiscal reform, we talk about subsidies, and some of these things are very difficult to understand, especially on a podcast, because most people listen to us while they're driving or while they're working out. So so the challenge for us, and we always challenge ourselves, is are you able to take tax reform and explain it in 5 minutes in a way that somebody who's not involved in taxation can understand, and play it back to yourself? Do you understand it? If you can do that, then you've succeeded, because your core value of educating the public, lifting the public discourse and political discourse to a level where it's more accessible to as many people as possible. That's our motto, to make political discourse accessible to all. Ensure transparency and honesty. Again, you'll get found out. There's no media gatekeeping in this new generation. If you're not honest, you will get found out, you'll get cancelled. Engage in meaningful conversations. So yeah, of course we joke around on the podcast, but at the end of the day, it's anchored on the fact that we elevate the discourse and we talk about stuff that's real and important, that we feel is important. Supporting the relevant causes. Again, it's not for show, but it has to be real, it has to be authentic. And you have to make sure that the causes that your brands are associated to are relevant to the audience, of course. And maintaining consistency across channels. This is so important. This is my last point. Because when you work on multiple channels, you tend to want to project things that are relevant for that particular channel. So as a politician, I know this. I read the room, study the crowd. I say things that I think that crowd wants to listen to. Then I go to another crowd, I shift that message a bit. That worked in the past, doesn't work now anymore, because everything's online, everything's captured, everything's shared, no media gatekeeping, and people will get found out. So if you're inconsistent, if I say something different here, then I go somewhere else and say something different, then you'll be cancelled immediately. So try to keep it consistent across your channels. Of course, it's going to be different. The messaging is different slightly in terms of not the substance, but in terms of the style, perhaps, in terms of the color, in terms of the pitch, slightly. But the core message has to be consistent throughout, because otherwise you're going to be in trouble. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Khairy, actually, we have some questions for you. I think we have time for about 1 or 2 questions.
Sure.
Yeah.
Let's see.
The most popular one is at the top
At the
with
top.
6 likes.
6 likes. That's not very popular, is it? Where is it? 6. There's 4 there. Do you think local tertiary institutions are progressive enough in terms of localizing sustainability, environmental courses? What role should creative industry play in promoting innovation and responsibility amongst youth, especially amongst... Okay, let me try to summarize it. I think, I've not done an audit about local tertiary education institutions, but from what I do know, the consciousness amongst university students here in Malaysia is just the same as anywhere else in the world. I think a lot of public university campuses especially, are moving towards becoming more sustainable. So if you go to there's a sustainability charter, there's a drive towards making the campus green and more sustainable. The courses, I'm not sure. I've not done enough research on that to tell you. How can we navigate the science policy interface better? Wow, that's moving fast. Especially in so yeah, this is a great question because I was at the science ministry. The science policy interface needs to be communicated better. So what I do with politics, somebody needs to do with science. I'd love to see a great science podcast out there. And there isn't. There is in other parts of the world, but in Malaysia, I've not really seen one. I've been on this acquisition spree of podcasts because our podcast is growing and it's become a business. So I'm acquiring other podcasts now. And I'm looking for a science podcast. If you know of a science podcast that's exciting, then please let me know because I want to turbocharge an existing science podcast because public communication of science is very important. And I know this because I was helping out during COVID as your science and health minister. And one of the most important elements of succeeding during COVID was actually communicating well. And people didn't understand about the virus, people didn't understand about vaccines, mRNA, viral vector, inactivated vaccines, whatever. And it was so important for us to break that down. So I think we need some popular science programs. Maybe last one, what will it take for Malaysians to be more responsible for their actions in combating climate change? I mean, you can legislate. You can legislate, a lot of countries legislate, and we do have legislation. But I always say in government, in public policy, legislation should be the last thing. It should actually be behavioral before you get to laws. It should actually be people with conscious decision to want to change their lifestyle, want to make a difference, rather than forcing them by law, by punishment, by fines, by imprisonment. So I think we have to look beyond legislation. We have to put the people who find this as an existential threat front and center of deciding things, of policy making, and because for them, it's an actual real thing. Last one, about cancel culture and tailoring communication to Zillennials, seems like there's a gap in the ability to act with nuance. How do we cultivate it? Well, I mean, it sounds cliched, but you can't fake it, right? I've seen so many brands and so many people try to fake things, and it just doesn't work. And you can't teach authenticity, but whatever brand that you're working with, it has a core identity. That core identity might not fit nicely into sustainability or climate change, so don't force it into that agenda. Find ways in which it can align, but don't force it into a hole that it doesn't fit into. Yeah, I think if there's one message that I wanted to end with, and that was part of my last slide, is that try to find that authenticity in the brands that you represent. They do have something, they do have a core value, and don't try to force a square shape into a round hole. So, look for what is real out there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Khairy.